Hillary has been lengthening her excuses as to why she lost the election. She didn't really lose the election. It was stolen from her by, I think it's up to 24 different excuses she has now. Number 24 is content farms in Macedonia. And as I said, my grandfather was a Macedonian content farmer, and we often think about, gathering on the porch and recalling the old days on the Macedonian he never thought that the old content farmers he left behind in Macedonia would one day steal the U.S. presidential election. They are gnarled, hard-working Macedonian peasants, and the way they were able to reach out and steal the election from
3%. The number was on Zoran Zaev's mind for the past few weeks. Healthcare Minister Vinko Filipche told him that he ran the numbers 5 times, and the result was always the same. The coronavirus is not that deadly to the general population. But on election day, well, older people are the ones who vote. Add to that the confined close quarters, the expected rush of voters in the early hours, all trying to beat the crowd and the virus and be the first to vote. Even with masks and asking people to bring their own pens, the death rate among those who come to the polls will be at least 3%, Filipche said. And yet, in Zaev's mind it was clear there is no other choice. Sure, he could postpone the elections until September or even December when they are supposed to be held anyway, but he might as well flee the country now if that's the case. By then, the economy will be in tatters, the few hundred millions he borrowed having been long spent, and the government would be due at least 3 salaries for the public sector and at least 1 month worth of pensions. No politician alive can be asked to go to the polls in such conditions. No, it was clear. The elections must take place now, June, July at the latest. That way he would still have a chance. The money is still flowing, but barely, and those who were fired are still in 4 or low 5 figures. The public sector is still paid full freight, even though odds of this going on for much longer are very slim. He would still lose, but not by much, although dragging even the most die-hard citizen voters to the polling places is going to be a rhymes with which. Heck, with the Albanian partners and their lax approach to election security, he could even eke out a narrow win, if nobody objects too much to a 99% turnout in ethnic Albanian villages. It's unlikely he would last a full second term, not that he would want that. Ruling over a national collapse and economic ruin is not his thing. He was more into being lauded by the internationals in Davos and Munich as a visionary, but would buy him a little more time to do what he was installed to do and plan for his exit strategy. And surely that's worth the lives of 15,000 of his voters. That's it, Zaev decided. We're going to the polls. We'll discuss all of this and more on this episode of the Macedonian Content Farmers Podcast. I'm Jason Miko, coming to you from the mostly free and sovereign state of Arizona.
And this is Cvetin and calling in from Zaev's police state of Macedonia.
Today is Monday, May the 4th. May the 4th be with you, Cvetin. So
live long and prosper.
Yes, it's also we remember the death of Goce Delchev, Josip Broz Tito,
Vaska Ilieva.
Who else? Sorry?
Vaska Ilieva died on this day as well, the famous singer.
It's quite a day.
Yeah.
Wow, there's a lot going on. Or a lot went on.
It all depends on whose death you commemorate today. Is it Goce's or Tito's? It says a lot about you, although not as much as it used to, because now the Titoists are somehow pro-Bulgarian. I mean, go figure. It's getting real complicated now.
You know, this is the month of May 25, which is 3 weeks from today, I think, is the day that I celebrate my relationship, beginning of my relationship with Macedonia. It was 24 years ago on May 25, but we'll get to that in a future podcast.
That was also Tito's birthday, if I remember. I think it was national holiday.
No, his birthday's May 7. I haven't pulled up here on my screen. So, but May 25 is when I first came to Macedonia. But anyway, my point being, I remember when I was first in Macedonia, the first few years, I think it was May, right around this time, we would hike Tito Vrv in the the Shadar Mountains there. I don't know if it's still called Tito Vrv or not.
Yeah, it is. We are few things named after Tito were ever renamed. There's still
but not Veles. It used to be Tito Veles.
Yeah, I mean that
Tito
would have been really too much, keeping every other Yugoslav republic, erased Tito from the. Each had to have one city named after him.
Right.
And we had the industrial, toxic, polluted wasteland of Veles, which afterwards helped elect Trump and gave rise to this podcast and gave us the Veles assassins in Solun attacking Saloniki in 1903. So it's quite
all
a city there.
Yeah.
Well,
again,
today gave him quite a city in his honor.
There you go. Yeah. Well, okay. So today is May the 4th. May the 4th be with you. This is the Macedonian Content Farmers Podcast, episode 70. Wow.
Oh,
we're closing in on 100.
Around 100, yeah.
And as I mentioned there in the monologue, a lot of focus these days in Macedonia on the idea of elections. Again, elections were supposed to be held on April 12. All the political parties responsibly decided at that time, before that time actually, that elections couldn't be held. But now it's now Zoran Zaev is really gung-ho and pushing to have elections. I saw an earlier tweet or something that Shekarinska, the defense minister, who was roundly shouted down today as she laid a wreath at the tomb of Goce Delchev, shouted down by protesters saying "Never North, always Macedonia." But she too is calling for early elections as well. So, what's the hurry? What's the rush?
Well, I mean, obviously it's not safe to vote. I mean, we're still according to the criteria set forward by the government, which insisted that the numbers of infected are scary enough to lock down schools, most factories, most businesses across the country, and these numbers haven't improved. They remain horrible.
Right.
And yet, the government considers it normal now to hold elections under these same circumstances. And something is off, something is strange in this regard. And as you said in the grim introduction, the reason obviously is that Zaev, the country's holding on barely so far economically, but this can't go on much longer. Zaev was proposing cutting public sector workers' salaries in a bid to save the pensions, which are actually the big item budget, which is unsustainable. And I guess he hopes that elections in June or July, although still not safe for people to vote in these cramped conditions in the same schools which are now closed for the students, but getting 1 million people which normally vote in Macedonia through 20,000. Actually, there are 20,000 voting stations, but many of them are in the same school, so it would be a much more congested number of places. It would be dangerous, but then again, it would happen, if it happens in June or July, it would be before we've actually felt the economic collapse. So far, there is only about 10,000 people who have been officially fired. Many more are facing, garnished wages in the private sector. They're not sure how much longer their businesses will keep them. And of course, if they're self-employed, I mean, they know best the shape their business is in. But nevertheless, the government thinks it's the best it's going to be for a while in June or July, and they want to have the elections then. If they are postponed by October, when things would be more stable epidemiologically, economically, it's going to be much worse for the government, and they might really have to cut back on public sector salaries, or even, God forbid, a pension or two by then. And this would be horrible for SDSM going into the elections.
Right. So what is it from a legal standpoint? I know there's questions about how Parliament dissolved. The elections were never formally called off.
Yeah.
So from a legal standpoint, does anybody there have any idea on whether there's a coronavirus or not, legally how you go forward?
No, it's a big mess. The elections were never officially, legally called off. The Electoral Commission was ordered to stop the preparations. And now Zaev insists that they can resume where they left off, which is like 20, 30 days. I don't know how deep into their preparations. The commission, it's led by an opposition official, and he said, like, unlikely we can just continue where we ended. You will probably have to come up with a new solution, a new date agreed between all the parties, and somehow declared. We're still not sure who can now declare elections now that the parliament is dissolved. Vilmero proposed holding a meeting of party leaders to discuss, to set a date, while Zaev tried to reconvene the parliament on his own, even though it was dissolved already. They made one attempt to gather legal experts from both political sides to discuss how they can call off the elections or freeze them, but they couldn't reach an agreement, and no other attempt was made. So now there is no parliament. The Constitutional Court is being pressured by SDSM to recall the parliament again, as they did once in 2016. It was a horrible precedent.
Mm-hmm.
They were literally told, find any technicality, maybe like even a grammar mistake in the decision in the order to dissolve the parliament, just to reconvene it. This was under the orders of the U.S. Ambassador Bailey then, because it was good for SDSM to have the elections later in the year, in December 2016.
Mm-hmm.
So they might try to do this again, but we're already a laughing stock of a country, so we don't lose much more if we recall a dissolved parliament twice in 4 years, twice in a row. So this might happen. And most ridiculous of all, President Pendarovsky, he has the right to declare a state of emergency, but only once. So he did this, and then people advised him, the 30 days elapsed,
right,
which are given to him under the Constitution, as a right to declare a state of emergency. And so he was supposed to, smartest way for him to go forward would have been to say, okay, I'm reading the Constitution this way, and it tells me that I have the right to extend this indefinitely. But he said no. He said, I don't have the right to extend it for another 30 days, but I'm going to do so anyway because people are dying. And everybody was like, Jesus Christ, this person. So we have, the government has a legislative power right now under the state of emergency, but the person who signed off on the state of emergency acknowledges that he had no right to do so. So it's a complete mess. It's a complete disaster, legally speaking. Not that anybody cares much, because
Yeah, I mean legally, and not that the internationals are paying too much attention to Macedonia these days. Our friends on the left, the progressives, etc. They don't really care. Although, and I do want to go back. You mentioned one thing about the Bailey and the 2016 elections, and I think we should remind listeners that way back then, the elections kept getting postponed and postponed, and the issue was that the left in Macedonia kept insisting that the voter rolls were all wrong and needed to be cleaned up, and they were never cleaned up, and the left doesn't say anything about that today. So you're right. The whole thing, it's legislatively, economically, in every way you can measure it, Macedonia does seem to be a bit of a basket case right now.
Oh yeah.
On top of that, and pivoting slightly, we see a couple of other things going on. So while the country is a mess politically and economically, the government still finds time to go and remove the star of Kutlesh from public places. I think in Kriva Palanka most recently, a really large one in the public square there, I think. And they took grinders and ground it down. Whereas I did notice that somebody tweeted, I think it was our friend Mario Hristovsky from Ohio, that noted that the statue of Goce Delchev there in the Skopje Gradski Park, somebody was laying a wreath there, but the thing is just covered with graffiti. So they have time to remove a symbol of Macedonian pride with power tools, but they don't have time to remove the graffiti from a statue of Goce Delchev. Priorities, man.
Yeah,
Priorities.
that was one of the humiliations
and
of the
at
week.
the same time as all that's going. Exactly, yeah, humiliation of the week. Ooh, we could do that instead of a farmer's pick. We could do humiliations of the week. Humiliation of the week.
It's more easier to come up with new examples.
What's your farmer's humiliation of the week, Cvetin?
Yeah.
And so speaking of humiliations of the week, so our Bulgarian friends, I'm using air quotes and using friends in the meaning in which it is not meant to be friend. Our Bulgarian friends continue with their full court press threats, subtle threats in various ways from various government officials there, that if Macedonia doesn't get on board and deny its history and its identity, and if it doesn't insist that Goce Delchev was a Bulgarian, then then they will block EU talks. And of course the EU is totally silent on this. Even our international friends on the left are silent on that as well. Although I did see, going back to Stevo Pendarovsky, the president, I think he said somewhere, whether or not he's being truthful or not is another question, but he said that if we have to give up our Macedonian language, then EU membership isn't worth it. Did I get that right when I saw that?
Yeah, he did say that, and he's getting a lot of flack from it, from Albanian parties, Bulgarians. And he's not honest about this, obviously, because the whole thing for Stevo and for Zaev was that we have... Even Stevo, going back when he was advisor to Crvenkovski, that was when, let's say, 28 after Bucharest, 27, 28, 29, 2008, 2007, 2008, 2009. It was Pendarovsky and Crvenkovski who formulated the position that, which was pretty novel for us then, that if we have the choice between changing the name and national humiliation and, as a condition to join EU and NATO, we should choose the humiliation and EU and NATO. We can't go on without EU and NATO membership. This was actually formulated by Crvenkovski. Well, Pendarovsky was his main foreign advisor, and Pendarovsky would breathlessly brief journalists on how important this change in strategic outlook is after Bucharest. Right. So for him now to go back on this is really ridiculous.
Well, as Zaev repeatedly said in the lead-up to the so-called Prešov agreement, there is no alternative, quote-unquote, which of course is a logical fallacy. There's always alternatives. But he rammed that through with the support of the Western elites and the Gang of Eight, so-called, and basically ignored the consent of the governed. The failed referendum made the changes. So Macedonia is now in NATO. Now the next step, of course, and as we talked about this, I think on the podcast last week, Cvetin, that it seems that Greece and Bulgaria are tag teaming each other. So the Bulgarians are making the bet that since Macedonia already traded its name for NATO membership and a little bit of its identity, now Macedonia will also be willing to change complete the change in its identity, deny the language is Macedonian and its heroes, etc., for EU membership. I don't know. I don't know the intricacies of the European Union. No, but the idea of the idea of negotiating framework, I think, is the phrase that everybody keeps using for both Macedonia and Albania within the EU come June, and I have no idea if an individual state can block that or not.
Oh yeah, sure, easily. Okay. This is what Greece did. Okay, Bulgaria is not Greece, but then again, we are tag-teamed with Albania, so a bunch of other countries are also not eager to have us open accession talks, and not to mention that we signed on to the treaty, the 2017 treaty between Zaev and Borisov, which clearly states that these are things we must do. We undertook the obligation, so Bulgarians are completely right in the letter of the treaty and in the spirit of the treaty. They're completely wrong in that it constitutes good neighborly relations and that it will lead to friendship between Macedonians and Bulgarians. I have never in my life seen as many insults aimed at Bulgarians as over these past 10 days.
Oh, can I join in?
Feel free. I mean, I'm it's too much for me to follow up on the Greek dispute with the Bulgarian dispute. I mean, I'm tired and worn out of all this, and I don't want to go that way. But definitely the Bulgarian position of blocking Macedonia from opening EU accession talks until we accept their terms on their reading of history, especially as it comes from a really a friendly and close nation, unlike the Greek. I mean, you kind of expect it from the Greeks.
Sure.
You don't expect it from your cousins, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
And this is absolutely having an adverse reaction among Macedonians, and all the usual slurs Macedonians sometimes use for Bulgarians are now, which you normally don't hear like for years until something like this happens, and then it explodes. You can hear it all the time now, and Bulgarians are responding in kind online, and so it's definitely deteriorating relations between the two countries.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just reading Karakachanov, so Borisov, the prime minister.
Right.
He's, I don't want to do this. I'm being forced to do this by Karakachanov, my defense minister. Listen, I respect you. But then he makes sure he scores points, like humiliating VMRO officials when they meet together by secretly videotaping the meeting while he's playing tough guy, this Balkan macho guy. But then, this is unsustainable, his position that we just want some concessions and then we'll acknowledge that you are an independent country. This was also said by Ekaterina Zakharieva, the foreign minister. You acknowledge that you're Bulgarians, that you speak Bulgarian, that the language was made up by Tito, blah, 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 and then we'll accept that you're Macedonians and a separate nation and country. And that's like a middle of the road, but it's very slimy from me, honestly. While the defense minister, Karakachanov, he sounds like the man with the plan, much more, assured in what, in a longer term vision. If what Borisov and Zakharieva and Andrei Kovachev, the member of European Parliament who officially announced the blockade for Macedonia, are saying is clearly geared toward them winning points with the electorate, while Karakachanov is sounding like a man with a plan for the future, and he says we are forcibly divided. We were one nation, but we still are. We were forcibly divided, but then I foresee that the time will soon come when we will be reunited again. And he's, a defense minister of an EU and NATO member state is speaking about unification with a neighboring country. And he then warns us something that the Serbs used to do when they would try to get us to join them in a rump Yugoslavia. He also says, and don't forget that if things go on as they are now, you would have a much different problem. You would be a minority vis-a-vis the Albanians. You will have an Albanian president soon in your country. It will be led by Albanians. So you need the bigger brother to protect you, and you will ask yourselves for the unification of Macedonia with Bulgaria.
Right.
And we have, exactly as we predicted, that the weakening of the Macedonian national identity will lead to a scramble for partition of Macedonia.
Well, again, yeah, and we talked about this last week. I'm working on a new column, and I had a link to my article about that identity as national security, national identity as national security. You can't have certainly a NATO member, a NATO state that just is ripped in two physically. That puts the very idea of NATO itself at risk. And I would think that the leaders within NATO, certainly our friends in in Russia and China, are thinking about that as well. But if a NATO member state, Macedonia, were to be split in two and divided amongst its neighboring countries, whether they're NATO members or not, that certainly puts the whole question of NATO on the table, and what does it exist for? I'm as you were talking, I was looking this up. The next Bulgarian parliamentary elections are a year from now, so they have to be held by May of 2021. So, to your point that a lot of this is political electioneering on their part. That's true, but they're doing what they need to do for their own self-interest. On the one hand, I get that, but what are the Macedonian politicians doing? And we talked a little bit about Stevo. I see that Zoran Zaev here said basically that we have to implement this so-called Treaty of Friendship and Cooperation with Bulgaria and put aside our differences, etc. So he's basically saying, give them what they want. Am I?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, okay, right. So, and then the question then becomes for the Macedonians is, how long are the Macedonians going to put up with Zoran Zaev and Shekarinska and Oliver Spasovsky and all of these others who are basically handing over every bit of Macedonia and Macedonia's identity and pride and heritage and culture and language to neighbors? How long are the Macedonians going to put up with this guy?
Well, I mean, as in any other European country, in the US, you have self-made people, self-reliant people who do not want to be pushed around. You have the farmers, you have the people who run businesses, people who work something with their hands and their minds, etc. And these people want to have an independent country. Mm-hmm. They have no, mortgages around to the extent, that they would accept somebody, imposing humiliating conditions on them, or they want to have decisions made here. They want them to that they are the ones who make the decisions. In Macedonia, these were the people who voted VMRO. These were the people who voted for Macedonia to leave Yugoslavia as it was collapsing, to have our own nation state, our own country. And in an ironic twist of history, Bulgaria was supporting this movement in the 90s because it wanted Macedonia to secede from Yugoslavia and to be split from Serbia. But now this is no longer enough for Bulgaria. Now Bulgaria wants to make the second step. Some in Bulgaria believe, like Karakachanov, that now it's time to push for unification. Others are just scoring points along the same lines, are playing the same game. The other portion of the ethnic Macedonian population are, the public sector workers, the elite that was elevated in Yugoslav times, not because they were competent or because they were valuable, but because they were loyal to the regime. Yeah. Oftentimes they would be plucked from a village from abject poverty and dropped into Skopje, given villas on Vodno, the exclusive part of the city, and tenured jobs and like being academic or a professor or whatever. And these were the people who were most loyal followers of the Yugoslav regime, which was trying to undermine the Macedonian national identity and to replace it with a Yugoslav, South Slavic identity, which justified Macedonia remaining with other South Slavic countries, primarily Serbia.
Right.
But, these people are such sellouts that they supported communism and Serbia, essentially, while in Yugoslavia. But now, because they have no way of coming to power on their own, they're thoroughly debunked in the public, they latched on to the EU and American diplomats here in Skopje to be brought to power in the Colored Revolution 2015-2017. And now they're, openly offering their services to people, to Bulgaria, to Greece, regardless of the fact that their fathers, in some cases, if they're older themselves, served the Yugoslav regime specifically against Bulgaria and Greece, like Dinko Malevski, like Borjan Jovanovski, like Vlado Bučkovski, the former prime minister. They are now all coming out of the woodwork and declaring their complete support for the idea that we were once the same people with the Bulgarians, that Goco Delchev declared himself a Bulgarian. It's, both pathetic to look at them and also, given my sentiment for these people, it's deliciously, ironic and satisfying to see them. But ultimately, given add to this the number of Albanians in the country as voters, it's quite enough to break the country in two, because if the Macedonian left keeps making concessions to whoever comes along, and in the future it might be Turkey reasserting itself, it might be China there are even some colored revolution supporters of Zaev who are now openly working for China. I mean, I'll send you the links there. There's one of them from Spain who is now hired by Huawei. So it's not completely out of the Herrero, some lady.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are they declare themselves as ethnic Chinese now? As Han Chinese?
It's coming. It's coming. It's going to happen.
They will.
I mean, these are such sellouts that they would either support the resurgent Turkey into the region or China if it comes, or even Russia. Whoever comes, they were communists, anti-Western socialists.
Yeah.
Now they're pushing the notion that unless we join NATO, we are destroyed.
Right.
I completely see them in the future. They supported Serbian unity. Now they're declaring themselves retroactively as Bulgarians. I completely see them supporting, whoever comes next in the region, ideologically, religiously, no matter how different they are, that these people, the left in Macedonia, would completely follow their line. And, I think that some honest Bulgarians, although their sense of pride is nourished by the humiliation of Denko Malevsky or Buchkovsky, I guess they realize that they're buying the cheapest goods we have to offer in this country. While, the decent Macedonian folks on the right who want a Macedonian nation state, who have never in history said any bad word about Bulgaria. Actually, our fight was for decades back to liberate ourselves from Serbia. We're like, guys, I mean, if this is the way you want to do it, if you want to emulate Greece, fine, but this is going to have long-term consequences. For us, for the region, and the country will not survive this. I mean,
right.
You'll get your wish, but it's going to be bloody.
Yeah, well, I suppose, taking a 30,000 foot, 10,000 meter perspective, this is just kind of a replay, a repetition of the same old scene going on in especially any Western country. We have the same divides here between those who, between the progressive left and those conservatives like me who believe in conserving the Union, which in our case, conserving the founders' vision for these United States of America with a distinct ideology and government and economic system, etc. And you see the same thing going on throughout Europe, of course. In all of the nation states of Europe, you've got this divide. Now, I think, to your point, in Macedonia's case, I think it's a little more potentially deadly and dangerous in that it could literally split the country in two. We see other places, Belgium, of course, where you've got these potential real divides. And if you were to get down in the weeds and really start looking at each country case by case, you'd probably see the same thing. But yeah, it's these elite that you mentioned that the same as the elites here and whatnot that don't really have a loyalty to anything or anyone other than themselves, and they're most interested in their own power, prestige, the money and the perks that comes with it. These are the Carl Bildts of the world. Although he's not flying these days, so he can't tweet from Darmstadt.
It must be killing him.
Yeah, poor Carl. Yes. So, well, and that ties back in.
Send him some flying simulator game to just keep him on his toes.
Oh, I saw. This was fantastic. A friend of mine sent me a short video clip of somebody when you're really desperate to fly. So a treadmill. A standard treadmill that you want.
All right,
so this lady is on it going backwards with her little luggage cart, and it's moving very slowly. And then the next scene is she's waiting for her luggage to come down the treadmill cart as well. So then she picks it up and walks off. That's when you're really desperate to be back up in the air and flying. So I thought. Actually, our one of our mutual friends, I'm not going to mention his name, but lives there in Macedonia. He wrote me 2 months ago at the start of this thing, and he said it'll be a miracle if you ever get back here. And now I'm beginning to think, gosh, maybe he's right. It sure seems like it's going to be a while before I can get back to Macedonia.
Yeah, it's gonna take a while to process the notion that I have friends who have split families,
Yeah.
found themselves on the opposite side of the pond, and yeah, it's gonna be difficult to ever get back there or hear from there.
Yeah, but it'll happen. It'll happen.
Mm.
And we want to try and keep this as COVID-free as possible, this podcast, because there's enough of that. But tying back into what we started with in the elections, so kind of to sum up that part of this, we just don't know when the when the government itself is even going to be able to decide when the elections are going to be. And in the meantime, you just muddle through, I guess.
Yeah. Women are in no hurry for elections. They're obviously saying, listen, this is it's not safe under the terms and conditions which you declared. Your healthcare ministry declared. Obviously, there is some dissipation in SDSM, which Vamero is eagerly looking forward to. Like there was. The mayor of Kumanov is now openly splitting with SDSM, and this is the biggest branch in the party. This is SDSM. After Strumic, it was their main power base during the Gruevski term. They held on to Kumanovo, which is a huge power base for them, and they completely botched the coronavirus response in Kumanovo, which had the worst numbers so far in deaths and in infections, and the mayor is now openly revolting against the wing in SDSM, which is scraping off the Star of Kutlesh from monuments. He said, "I served in the army under this star. I'm not going, to denigrate it." And it's just next door to Kriva Palanka, their neighboring cities.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So he's now leading a faction in SDSM, or he may even completely split from the party and support Vimmer in the elections.
Wow.
He has a fight with the prime minister, the mayor. The prime minister is also from Kumanov, Oliver Spasovsky, and they have a fight within the party, and apparently this contributed to their slow response to helping the city, while the people who are doing this to their own country, destroying the symbol, the ancient symbol, like the mayor of Palanka, he is a Soros NGO, former head of a Soros NGO, USAID funded. So this is the other wing, the bought and paid for wing of the party. Well, you can still find SDSM people who are self-made. They led a large, like Zaev way back, they led a large party branch. They were successful in their city, like Maxim Dmitrievsky in Kumanov, and they do not have this type of mortgages they owe to the internationals.
Right.
So Vamero is looking at this and saying, okay, well, bring it on. Let's have more of this.
Divide and conquer.
Yeah. It is. It really is a huge humiliation. It's really very difficult to, even for a complete brainwashed SDSM supporter, to go along with. I've seen there are people who haven't tweeted about any of this Bulgaria stuff, who would normally be avid, not only followers of news, but they would post in English their take on the news, and they have nothing. They're trying to accuse Mitskovsky, the Vimero leader, of going to a gym to exercise during the curfew. Like, this is the big scandal they have on him, and they're probably using a dated tape of him, and all their tweeting is about this and lame stuff here and there. But what are they going to say? They're being humiliated constantly. The treaties they signed, they're obviously having the effect which we anticipated, and they did not, that this is going to be an endless string of humiliations and is going to tear the country apart.
So maybe I missed something. So does the M stand for masochist now?
Yeah, it sounds like a BDSM.
Maybe it is. Dear, a sad group of people. And I'm sure I have some friends that are citizen members. I don't openly poll people who are friends to what party they belong, whether in Macedonia or here in America or anywhere else. But I'm sure I do have some friends that are
literally traitors, even in the in any definition of treason you take. This is literally working for foreign interests against your own country, and not only once. I mean, this is the same thing was in 2001. Tracing back the actions of individuals like Buchkovsky and Verushevsky and Denko Malovsky and Pendarovsky. It's the same thing. They were openly working for. It's going to continue to cleave Macedonians along other lines. I mean, we have, we had the Vlah minority, which have been completely incorporated in Macedonia and in the Macedonian nation,
right,
considered an integral part, often praised for people like Pitu Guli or Tosha Proevsky.
Mm-hmm.
And now you have a Vlah person come out in support of the treaty with Bulgaria and say, well, listen, let's take an individual view of identity. We do not, all of us will be individually free to state what we want, but this is, in the collective sense, we can disregard whatever our history books say. We will individually, and they're trying to push this notion, and people respond to them in an ugly anti-Vlah term. Because, it's not his identity.
Right.
His identity is secured. But he's, musing that I should give up my Macedonian identity. And, this is obviously not raising hatred between Macedonians and Bulgarians, which is very predictable because, we do not want a close, friendly country, which we always admired, to block us from joining the EU. And now you have, a subgroup within the Macedonian nation. Also, we have many ethnic Serbs who would declare themselves, one parent is Serbian, another parent is Macedonian. They would declare themselves as Macedonians. They do not want to stand for this humiliation. They are now assuming a more pronounced Serbian identity. They say, well, listen, if you're going to take this, and if you're going to be second-class citizens in this country, I have a spare country, and besides, I can play my minority card here, since everybody else is playing it. So yeah, this is going to chip away at the Macedonian nation. I mean, this is the same as in Bulgaria, in Greece. All of these nations are, Greece also considers the Vlachs integrated, the Macedonians integrated. If something like this happens to Greece in the future, inshallah, we would see these cleavages reappearing. People will remember that their great-grandparents considered themselves Albanian or Macedonian or Vlah,
right,
or Turkish even. They would start considering, listen, Karamanlis, that sounds Turkish to me, right? So, what was the Venizelos? No, who was the fat guy who was, obviously Albanian.
From Pasok? That was Evangelos Venizelos.
Yeah, Venizelos, yeah.
The one, he looks like Jabba the Hutt. So.
Yeah. May the fourth be with you. So we'll definitely, if a country is brought into this situation, such cleavages would reappear.
Right.
And this is happening to us now.
Yeah, well, unless, of course, if you read the headlines, then coronavirus is going to kill everybody first. So maybe that's the saving grace. Well, I think we've talked enough about humiliations. That might be the title of this podcast. I'm not sure. We always come up with that after we finish with the podcast. Yes. All right. Well, we will stay tuned to the political machinations in Macedonia to see what the leaders come up with in terms of elections, while following the Bulgarians to see what new humiliations they demand. And we're just getting started. This is the beginning of May, and the EU is going to meet in June, I think. So, but the days fly by. What day is it anyway? Oh wait, no, I know.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, that's the question on everybody's mind. What day is it?
I keep missing some routine tasks which I normally do on a given day, and I keep forgetting about them.
Yes. Well, yeah, I'm fortunate. I still have an office I can go to. There's nobody here. There's only one other person in the office, and some days I don't even see him. So I'm still able to do that and keep my routine by my morning hike to try and keep somewhat fit, although it's getting hotter than hell here. So,
yeah.
So it gets harder and harder to. You have to get up earlier and earlier to hike before it gets too hot. So, anyway, what else do we have to talk about? Anything else? Any more humiliations?